Hello, everyone. Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. It's super early for me, so it is morning for me. I will go ahead and start off by sharing my screen. And is everybody okay? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So I will start off with a little bit of introduction about myself. My name is Nidhi. I actually come from a very small village in West Bengal. It's called Baudia, and that's where I lived until I was 13. After which my family moved to Calcutta. I did my school, college, everything in Calcutta. I completed my undergrad in 2012. And sorry, some people are still saying they're not able to hear me. I'm going to change the setting ones. Just bear with me for a minute. Okay. Just give me 1 minute, guys. Can you hear me now? Am I audible now? Okay, perfect. I'm really sorry, I do not, if you're not able to hear me, this recording is going to be up, so you guys can definitely access it. So I actually did my undergrad in 2012 from St. Xavier's College, Calcutta, did my CA in 2013. I worked in India for about 2 years after that. And then I worked in the US for 3 years. And now I live in Canada. It's been about 10 months. I live in Canada now. And I've been, so you can say, including articleship, I've been working for what, about 10, 8, 9 years? And most of which has been internal audit, because most of my articleship was in internal audit. So, which is why I felt like giving this presentation would make so much more sense for me. Okay, so coming to internal audit, what really is internal audit? Now, internal audit, it is basically a tool for an organization to improve its efficiency and to evaluate and improve efficiency. So what really happens is, when an entity is operating, when an organization is operating in multiple countries or in multiple cities, they want to be sure that all the risks are covered, that there is nothing that the entity or the organization is exposed to that can lead to potential fraud, embezzlement, misappropriation of assets, manipulation of records, so that everything on the financial statements look clean and the business can run smoothly. So that is the whole concept of internal audit. Yes, there is a lot of technical definition, but what is important to always remember is that it is inherently married to risk. Internal audit is all about risk. You go and find out where your risk is, and then you come up with plans to mitigate, control, and get hang of that risk. So, like I said, of course, it is inherently married. It is more of a global concept, and that is why it tends to remain fluid and similar across borders. So what really happens, what that really means is that what happens in internal audit is, because internal audit is tied to risk, and risk sort of it's the same, right? The definition of risk doesn't change if you change the country. If a transaction is a risky transaction in India, it's going to be a risky transaction in North America as well. So, which is why internal audit overall globally, it remains the same. And which is why my transition was very easy, because internal audit in India, internal audit in North America is actually pretty similar. So this is, of course, the main thing to take from this slide is that it evaluates and improves the effectiveness of an organization's risk management, control, governance, and accounting processes. So what really happens in internal audit? What does an entity try to do when it's trying to do internal audit? It really audits its own self, which is me going, if I'm the company, me going and figuring out what we're doing wrong, where the risk lies, and fixing it. So it is performed to give assurance to top level management, as you can see. So we are the eyes of the upper management. And what the upper management really means is either the top level executives or the board. So because it is not possible for a board, which is maybe like 5 people, 8 people, 12 people, 15 people, it is not possible for them to make sure that everything worldwide is going okay. because they can only do so much. We all have only 24 hours, right? So they need internal audit to make sure that everything is going the way it is supposed to go. And it also ensures that governance and internal control processes are operating effectively. So what do you mean by corporate governance? That really means that every corporate has its own set of policies. So they come up with, how do you want to manage cash? How do you want to manage your debtors? How do you want to manage your creditors? So they all come up with their own set of policies, and to make sure that every entity globally is following that policy. That is the governance, right? You have to make sure that there's a corporate governance. And that is why internal audit it just becomes a very, very important part of any organization. Oops. Sorry, guys. Click the wrong button. What are the benefits? Well, first of all, and think of it, if you're able to eliminate risk, if you're able to eliminate possibility of fraud, what are you going to do? You're going to end up protecting your assets, which is here. You're going to reduce possibility of fraud. You're going to be able to identify control deficiency. So what is control deficiency? That means that when you have set of processes, those set of processes that you've had, they also have controls to make sure that the processes actually happen the way they're supposed to happen. So if those controls are not there, the processes may not function well. So if the controls are not functioning right, there may be a control deficiency, and then the process may not work the way it is supposed to, and there could be, the process could fail, it could not perform well. So if you're able to detect the control deficiency, then you can also have scope for process improvements. It also increases efficiency in processes because you can come up with ways to improve things. It ensures compliance with regulation, which is very important because, again, when you're working globally, each country has its own law. Each convention has its own law. For example, Europe has the EU Commission laws that you have to follow. It also has the UK set of laws that you have to follow. And if you're an American company or an Indian company, then you obviously have to follow your local law of the land. So you have to make sure that there is somebody making sure that you're compliant with all the regulations so that you're not getting caught in any of the countries. So internal audit is always making sure that you have compliance with regulation, and it establishes monitoring processes, which is the management, the top management, the board that we spoke about. They're making sure that everything is getting monitored, everything is under control, people are doing what they're supposed to, employees are performing activities like they're supposed to do. So now applicability. And this applicability is of course to India specific. So who has to get internal audit? Well, the first is of course listed companies. I'm sure you guys have heard of SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley. So that is where a lot of countries got their internal audit standards from. So just like SOX mandates listed companies to get internal audit. Similarly, most countries, if you're a listed company, you have to go and get internal audit. India is very special and smart because it also makes sure that unlisted companies, which are, they're not publicly traded on the stock exchange, they also have to get internal audit if their paid up share capital is of 50 crores or more, and the turnover, which is your revenues for the year, are 200 crores or more in the preceding financial year. So if in the last financial year, you have a paid up share capital, which is more than 50 crore, or you've had revenues of more than 200 crores, then you have to get internal audit. Or if you have loans or borrowings that exceed 100 crore, and you have outstanding deposits of 25 crore or more at any point during the year. So this point is basically at any given day in the year, if you have a borrowing that is exceeding 100 crores, and you have outstanding deposits of 25 crores or more, you have to get internal audit. Private companies also have to get internal audit with turnover of 200 crores or more in the preceding financial year, or if they have outstanding loans or borrowings of 100 crores at any point during the year. So I have to point out one thing. I do feel that India has very smart regulations about who needs to get internal audit, because just because you're listed, that doesn't make you big or small enough to get internal audit. The numbers really make you big enough for an internal audit. So even if you're unlisted or you're a private company, as long as your numbers are big enough, you have to get internal audit. That being said, I would say most companies in West have internal audit if they're this big, if they have this number, but it is not in the law. So if you do not have internal audit, you may not need it, but it is not in the law, but most companies still have it. But India is smart because they have it in the law. So who can be an internal auditor? Now, of course, you can have an individual, which is people like you and me. You can have a partnership firm, which is, like a CA firm. Body corporates, you can have a company. And an internal audit can be a chartered accountant or a cost accountant. So this is very interesting because even CMAs can consider becoming internal auditors. And any such professional as the board appoints. So this is, again, stupendous power given to the board. So the board of directors can be like, what, we want this XYZ person. Even if he's an engineer, they can appoint him to be internal auditor. So internal audit becomes a very vast field in that sense. You don't really need to have any specific qualification that can make you an internal auditor. So what are the activities? Now, we've already spoken about, what really internal audit is. So think of it. If you're an internal auditor, what are you going to do? The first thing you have to do is you have to understand the business, right? You have to understand what is the industry you function in, who are your major competitors, what kind of customers you're servicing, and what are the major product lines that you're dealing in. Once you've done that, once you've understood the business, then you can understand, okay, where are the risks? Do I feel like, people are not gonna take the asset turnover ratio very seriously? Is that a risk? Do I feel like we're not gonna force our customers to pay us in time? Is that a risk? So figuring out where the risks lie. Now, one thing that's very important is risks depend on entity. So for example, what may be a risk in an Indonesia location may not be a risk in a London location. So risks really depend on which part of the world you're in and what part of what business line you're auditing. Then once you've identified your risks, so you've looked at the business, you've looked at, okay, these are the risks, then you have to identify the mitigating controls. So once you've identified the risks, then you go and sit with the local management and you try to understand, okay, what are the controls that are going to make sense? What are the controls that the local management has in place so that these risks don't affect the business? So once you've understood, okay, these are the controls in place, you get a whole list of the controls, then you develop risk-based sampling and testing. So now you have to test those controls because everything depends on those controls working right, correct? So now you develop a whole audit program relating to these controls. Then once you've done your testing, then you come up with issues, you give the issues to the local management, and then you follow up on remediation. And what is very interesting about internal audit is that this happens entity by entity. So like I said, for example, from my personal experience, there are certain risks that exist in Southeast Asia. So if I'm going to Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia, there are certain risks that I already know of course, through experience now. Those risks will not exist in Europe because these are just completely different countries, completely different part of the world, very different social structure. So what becomes a risk in Southeast Asia is not a risk here. And so when I'm going to Southeast Asia, the audit program is completely different. So every month when I do a new country for my employer, I have to come up with a new audit program. I have to come up with a new audit testing approach. And that I think makes internal audit very interesting because every month you're doing something new. It is not the same. So these are all the activities that you're going to be doing. Now, internal audit. A lot of people think that internal audit is so boring because it's just SOX. That's Sarbanes-Oxley, but that's not true. Internal audit is a lot of things, and these are the general categories. So your general categories include financial statement controls, which is Sarbanes-Oxley. So a lot of y'all probably are already familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley. This is an act that came about after the Enron scandal in the US. After that, they decided that, hey, we need stronger internal controls to make sure that entities are constantly looking at their own risks and mitigating it. So this is the whole act. And a lot of countries worldwide adopted the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. I have to say SOX is very strict. We actually call it SOX, and SOX is pretty strict, but it is also monotonous. So if you've done SOX like 5-6 times, it stops. Like it's not very interesting after that. Sorry guys, Ashley I know you guys are sending me questions, but I would really appreciate if you do not constantly keep typing messages in the chat box because it breaks my flow. So I will come to all the questions in the end. Okay, so now coming back to Sarbanes-Oxley. So that is financial statement controls. Now, what do you have to make sure that your financial statements are always reporting the real truth of the business? That is what Sarbanes-Oxley is going to help you get to. The second is regulatory compliance, which is making sure that you're complying with all the laws. And this is probably my second favorite. So my least favorite is SOX. My second most favorite is bribery or anti-corruption. So what happens is, a lot of countries have their own laws. I'd already mentioned this. For example, if you're working in the UK, there's a UK Bribery Act. If you're working in the US, there is US export controls. There is anti-corruption. So there are a lot of acts that you have to comply with. And to make sure that all your entities globally comply with those acts, you need internal audit to go out and make sure that they're doing that. And so these actually, the regulatory compliance part of it goes deeper than SOX. And I think it is stupendously, exciting if it is new for you. At least for me, it was super new because I'd never done anything like that. So it's a lot of legal work in that sense. And it makes it very interesting and amazing because you get to learn, laws of completely different countries. You get to work with legal counsels of really different countries. You come across commercial litigation, which is basically, corporate cases that people file. So if you ask me my favorite, that is anti-corruption. I personally love doing anti-corruption because it goes really deep and you can totally understand what a country functions like. So that's the regulatory compliance. And the third, and which is my absolute favorite part of internal audit, that is the operational reviews, which means process improvements. So what we do in that is that we look at an entity and we look at their processes. Now, because we're internal audit, we've been to multiple entities. So we know which entity is doing what right, which entity is not doing what right. So when we look at your different processes of the entity that we are auditing for operations, we're going to look at a lot of data and we're going to be like, you know what, you're not doing the purchasing cycle right. You know what, you're paying your vendors too early, or you're not following up on your customers to pay us too early. So that gives us a lot of ways to improve processes. And personally, it is, like I said, it is my absolutely most favorite part. Why? Because one, you're really doing something that adds value. You end up making either cost savings, or you're leading to increase in sales, or making a process more efficient. And then second, you don't, as CAs, we don't really study anything like this, right? Because so it becomes very interesting, and there is no law behind it. It is all mental math. You have to constantly think, okay, what can we do better here? What can we do better there? What can we eliminate? Which business line can we add? So that makes it super interesting. And third, you learn a lot of data analytics tools, which is technology, and that is the future. So just being able to do something like a process improvement is super exciting. And like I said, that these three parts make internal audit very, very exciting. It doesn't remain boring after that. Okay, so internal audit in India. So I actually went to ICAI, which is, all of our favorite place to be on their website. And I figured that there are internal auditing standards in India. And I'm actually going to brush through a couple of standards in this PowerPoint, which I feel are important. And, you can definitely go back and read on details on that. But I feel like knowing those standards definitely helps in planning and making sure an internal audit goes right. So SIA, that is Standards of Internal Auditing, 110, that is nature of assurance. So what kind of assurance are we trying to provide through internal audit? And this is very different than external audit, because we're not trying to say if the financial statements are materially misstated or not. That's not the objective here. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to focus more on the controls, on the processes, and we're trying to say that we have controls in place that can mitigate our risks. So that is the basic difference between external audit and internal audit. We have two assurance assignments. Reasonable assurance assignment to provide an opinion over the whole subject matter after conducting an audit of the whole subject matter. So this is actually looking at maybe your accounts receivable, AR, which is your debtors. I'm really sorry, I missed out. There are some terms that I may use which are not American, so I really apologize. But yeah, so for example, your AR, which is your debtors. So if you're looking at your debtors, the whole process of it, if you look at it, and if you provide an assurance on that, if you provide an opinion on that, that becomes reasonable assurance assignment. Limited assurance assignment is you actually look at only a part of the cycle. So you're actually, for example, if you're looking at AR and you're only looking at customer bank accounts, where the money is coming from, that part, and you're making sure that the controls with those, like they're set up right in the system, that the wire transfers actually happen on time, that there are no errors, etc. So that is limited assurance, where you're only looking at a part of the whole subject. So that is your limited assurance assignment. Now coming to standards of internal audit 120, which is internal controls, definition of internal controls. So of course, internal control over financial reporting, which is what we test in SOX, plus operational control, which we test in operational reviews. If you add ICFR and OC, what you get is you get an internal financial control to make sure that your financial processes are going as they're supposed to. You get your entity level controls, which is your entity-wide controls that you have. And these two together become the internal control. So what really happens in an organization in terms of making sure that things are going fine is, of course, you have to make sure that the policies that you've set at the entity level, which we actually call them corporate policies, so that is set by the head office, everybody has to follow it. So that is your entity level control. Plus your internal financial control that you can have of your own to make sure, because financial controls depend on where you're functioning. Because you may treat a certain item, for example, not-for-profits, they have very different accounting if you do it in the US as opposed to if you do it in India. So that internal financial control can depend on where your entity is, but the entity level control, the ELCs, they remain the same. So this makes sure that internal controls function well, and the responsibility of a management in this is to make sure that the internal controls are implemented and they are operating efficiently. The responsibility of internal auditor is just to test the controls. Their job is not to make sure that the controls are operating efficiently or not. So how do you manage the internal audit function? So we'll go to SIA 210 to understand how to manage the internal audit function. Now, again, it's very similar to external audit. You have a chief internal auditor, and he has his own team. So you have a chief of internal audit, that's going to be the boss, or you can call it the equivalent of a partner. And then he has his own team. There is an internal audit charter. So what happens in a charter is they lay down their objectives. What are the objectives that they want to get to make sure that the internal audit process is actually efficient and it is actually giving results that it is supposed to. So they lay down all of that in a charter, and the chief has the overall responsibility to make sure that these objectives are met with. So of course, there's a team and everybody has individual responsibilities, but yes, it is the chief who is in the end completely responsible. So planning for an internal audit, and I've already told you guys that there are two types of plans. Overall plan, which is going to be like, okay, what is it in this year that we want to achieve? Do we want to make sure that our operational risks are down globally? So we're going to go and do a lot of operational audits. Or do we want to make sure that our financial controls are good? So we're going to do a lot of SOX audits. So that is your overall plan. And then there are specific internal audit plans. Now, once you've decided, how many, what is the overall objective for the year or for the quarter, then you come up with, okay, now I know this, but I have about 120 locations. So in which all location do I want to make sure that my plan works? So then you come up with specific audit plans. So those are the two types of plans. And there is, of course, an audit committee. If you're a listed company, you're supposed to have an audit committee. Or if you're not listed, then you can have a board. So they will, in consultation with the internal auditor, they will formulate the scope, the function, the periodicity, and the methodology. So all of these parties come together and they decide. What is interesting to note is nobody's doing the testing here. Testing is only done by internal auditor. They can only come up with scope or functioning or like scope. What do you want to test? How much do you want to test? Functioning, the whole process. Periodicity, when do you want to do it? Methodology, what is it that they should test more and less? So they can only, the audit committee and the board can only guide that much. Internal audit, if you personally ask me, has a lot of independence. SIA 230, which is Objectives of Internal Audit. So according to Para 3 of Framework Governing Internal Audit issued by the Institute, it states this: internal audit provides independent assurance on the effectiveness of internal controls and risk management processes to enhance governance and achieve organizational objectives. I know it sounds like, you know, my God, these are two very completely heavy words. That's how I looked at it the first time I saw it. But basically what it's trying to say is the only framework is internal audit has to provide assurance. It has to provide some opinion on how the controls are working. Are the controls working effectively so that the organizational objectives are met, which is, you know, the organization doing well and is healthy, or are they not functioning well? So the objectives are formally recorded in either the charter, which we already spoke about, or an engagement letter. Engagement letter really happens when you're outsourcing the internal audit services. For people like me, because I'm employed by my employer to do internal audit, we really just have a charter. Using the work of an expert. Can you get a work of an expert? Of course you can. Personally, I've used them a lot, especially when you're working in countries that are non-English speaking, because then you have no idea what the language is. For example, I remember working on a project in China, everything was in Mandarin, and I just did not know how to read it. So, you know, even the Excel spreadsheets look completely different. Or working in France, where even their computer keyboards are different because all their alphabets are different. So then you need an expert to either help you with the translation or to help you with basic testing. It is pretty much same as the basic auditing standard that you may have studied for external audit. And of course, just like the external audit piece, the responsibility, the ultimate responsibility lies with the chief of internal audit, which is, I mean, it's only the chief internal auditor who can have a responsibility for taking any opinion on the expert's work. SIA 310, planning the internal audit. Now, how do you make sure that internal audit is planned well? So of course, we already covered, you have to have 2 levels, the overall plan for the year and specific plans covering individual assignments. I've already mentioned internal audit has a lot of independence. So once you present, so these are the 2 areas where you can actually hear, you can get feedback from the board or the audit committee, where they can come and tell you, you know what, this year I want to look at this piece more. This year I want to do SOX more. This year I want to do commercial litigation reviews more. So they can come and give us a feedback on that, but we get to choose the specific plans because that is our independence. We get to decide which entity, unless the board feels that there is an entity that has a lot of risk, which has happened, you know, because if you're a listed company, you're going to have a hotline where people can call and complain. And if there's a complaint, and then board will involve internal audit, and then internal audit goes and makes sure that the complaint is valid or not. So you're going to have the overall plan, which is done with in consultation with all a bunch of people to make sure that all of the organizational objectives are coming into play, or you're going to have specific plans. Internal audit evidence. Again, very similar to what we've studied in the statutory audit pieces. It refers to all the information used by the internal auditor in arriving at the conclusions on which their opinion is based. Just like external audit, it just means what is it that you looked at to give the opinion that you gave? What is the objective of audit evidence? What do you want to make sure the audit evidence should cover? So it should confirm the nature, time, and sufficiency of audit procedures. It should aid in supervision and review of the internal audit work. And should establish that the work is performed in conformance with the applicable pronouncements of the ICAI. So you always have to make sure that you are working in conformance with ICAI. You know, you have all these standards, so your work is always going to be within these standards. Internal audit documentation, it refers to the written record. It could be electronic or otherwise, to make sure that all your relevant audit evidence is there available and that can suffice the opinion that you've made. What is the objectives of internal of audit documentation? You have to validate the audit findings and support the basis on which audit observations are made. And I would say this is the most important and the most difficult part. Because once you've made an opinion, you have to have enough documentation to prove or to suffice why you're saying what you're saying. You cannot just walk up and say, I don't think the numbers look good. No, you need to have enough documentation. And somewhere I feel like this is one of the major differentiating points from statutory audits and internal audit. In statutory audit, in general, the onus of proving lies on the client. So once you go and tell them, I don't think the numbers look right, the client has to come back and tell you, you know what, the numbers look right, these are the calculations. In internal audit, that's not what happens, in reality at least. In internal audit, it is on you to prove that, hey, listen, this is my audit finding, and this is the basis on which audit observations are made. I will detail on it later with my personal experience of what I've seen. The audit documentation also has to aid in supervision and review of the internal audit work. And it has to establish that the work performed is, of course, in conformance with all the pronouncements. SIA 350, review and supervision of audit assignments. Again, pretty much similar. It has to, the audit evidence has to be reviewed. It has to be made sure that actually the conclusions drawn actually are correct, and it is documented in the work papers. Communication with management. The internal audit is required to have an effective two-way communication with the management, both while discussing the internal audit function and also while conducting an internal audit assignment. Personally, I would say, again, this is a very difficult part, because what really happens is that internal audit is, because it is a part of the company, because internal audit has been appointed by the board, by the top level management, to go and see what is going wrong or what is not working the best way globally. People are actually very scared of internal audit, because board takes internal audit very seriously. And I'm saying that very seriously. If there is a finding in internal audit, you can expect the board to probably call you straight up, pick up the phone and call. So it is a very, very intense profession that way, because nobody wants to be written up on a report and get a call from your CEO. Nobody wants to have that. So what is important is to have an effective two-way communication with the management. You have to make sure that you and the management who you're auditing are actually on the same page, because otherwise it is going to lead to a lot of unnecessary parties being involved and it becoming a mess. I do feel that it does get a little difficult. Well, not a little, it gets a lot more difficult, especially when you go to countries that are still developing, that are not on page with the Western world. Not to say that they're not doing things right. It's just that, of course, there's scope for more improvement there. And so it gets very difficult in those areas. SIA 370, reporting results. So now that you've done your audit, so you've planned it, you've tested it, you've collected your evidence, you've documented it, you've had a communication. So now it's time to report the results. So at the end of a particular audit assignment, you will have an internal audit report covering a specific area. So you're going to basically say, what did you audit? So you're going to cover a specific area. You're going to audit a function or a part of the entity, and it's going to be prepared by the internal auditor. And the internal auditor is going to highlight all the observations from these assignments. On a periodic basis, at the close of a plan period, a comprehensive report is also going to be prepared by the chief internal auditor. So what really happens is, after every audit, you're going to, of course, prepare an audit report that is specific to just that entity. And then maybe quarterly or semi-annually or annually, you're going to have a report which is going to summarize everything that internal audit did in the period. That's going to be prepared by the chief internal auditor, and that is going to be presented to the board or the audit committee. And that's going to list all the major findings, what all did we look at, the numbers, etc., etc. SIA 390, monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues. So internal auditor also has a responsibility of making sure that prior audit issues usually in the form of an action taken report of previous audits. This is the remediation, because you also have to make sure, as an internal auditor, you have to make sure you came up with all these findings, and then you have to make sure that people are remediating it. People are actually working on your report and making sure that those risks are fixed, those control deficiencies are fixed. So that is called action taken report of previous audits. And actually you have to report it again. So we actually call it remediation. And it is done generally in the last couple months of the year. Before you hit year end, you have to make sure that all the identified control deficiencies are taken care of. Now, talking about global aspect of internal audit, why I say that internal audit is just so fluid and it's so, it takes you globally. So I've worked in over 20 countries till now, and I've only been doing, in my current role, I've only been around for 2.5 years. So I've actually been to about 25 countries, and I've worked with very different laws, very different regulations, completely different languages. So globally, internal audit, like I said, golden rule of accountings don't change. So if you're going to debit cash when cash is coming in, you're still going to debit cash in India or in the US or in Canada. If you're going to, credit a certain account in India for a particular transaction, you're going to do the same thing. So the basics don't change. What is fraud in India is going to be fraud in the US, because the definition does not change. So that makes internal audit extremely global. And of course, it gives you the access to travel to multiple countries. I've already mentioned, how much it is interesting if you're doing the compliance part of it, because you're working on legal. Those are things that we've not really studied, because these are legal laws of the countries that you're going to. So of course, if you're like me, you've probably studied the legal laws in India. Or after I did my CPA in 2019, I kind of know a little bit of the US laws also. But I would have never imagined studying the German laws. Now I can, right? Because now I'm doing it. This is my work. So you're kind of really aware of what's happening globally. That, I think, is again a very, very interesting and definitive part of internal audit. Of course, the travel really helps. It liberates you. It opens up your mind. And when I say that internal audit is the eyes of the top management, I really mean it, because like I said, you're going to all these global locations. You're the one who knows what Thailand does. You're the one who knows what Poland does. So you're the one who knows what is it that Poland is doing perfectly that we can implement in other locations? What is it that Thailand is doing perfectly that we can put it across in other locations? How can we find synergies between Australia and Chile? How do we find synergies between South Africa and Argentina? So, these things, the fact that you're always thinking globally, that you're never really thinking of just one business line. And of course, the business lines are also different, right? Any company today is very diversified. So you're looking at, what we are manufacturing in Malaysia. Can we manufacture that for cheaper somewhere else? Do we really have a demand for that in Malaysia? Or do we actually have a demand for that somewhere in Europe? So you're constantly looking at those decisions. That makes it super interesting, because you're always thinking globally. You're never defined to boundaries. Lastly, the operational, the process improvements. That kind of makes your business partner. You don't really feel like an employee. You're the only person in the organization, in any organization, if you're an internal audit, you're the only one who's going to know the business, because you're the one who's going to different locations. So it is a great path into leadership also. It is very funny. A lot of people here call internal audit leadership track, because if top management wants to find a leader, there is no one better than an internal auditor, because the internal auditor has already been to multiple places, has already seen how businesses are done worldwide. So if they need a leader in, suppose, HR, internal auditor. Why? Because the internal auditor knows about the HR laws, right? They know about the regulations that are applicable worldwide. They know which entities are great in following them, which entities are not so great in following them. So it is actually a great path into leadership. And of course, I've done internal audit only for my articleship was 3.5 years. I did it mostly in internal audit, and I was very limited, I would say, because I was an article, and you can only do so much as an article. But I think the last 2.5 years in internal audit have been extremely, eye-opening. That is all. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. And I hope that this session was good for you guys. Okay. Anurag Shukla is asking, is it necessary to do CIA course for a CA in India who's interested in internal audit? Not at all. I mean, one thing that I want to clarify is there is no particular course that you have to do to be in internal audit. And why do I say that? Because really it is not about the course. Like I said, you already have the knowledge. As long as if you're doing CA or cost accounting or CS, it doesn't really matter because you have the knowledge, you have the basics in your head. And you don't really need someone to tell you, oh, this is fraud and this is not fraud. What you need is good soft skills to make sure that that knowledge comes out the way it is supposed to. So that is important. And no course can guarantee you success in internal audit. So Darshan is saying, ma'am, kindly guide on how to draft audit program. If you could share pro forma example. Darshan, unfortunately, I'm not able to share an example because work is, I'm legally obligated to not to talk anything about my work. But of course, like I said, there's no specific guide. That is what makes it so interesting, because you have to look every audit. You have to just look at that one entity. First, you have to understand what they're doing. And then you figure out, okay, now I know this is how you're handling your cash. So now I know this is what I need to test to make sure that I'm testing your process. And so there is no like fixed set of programs as opposed to external audit where it's mostly fixed. Okay, Ashish Tiwari is asking, how is internal audit and forensic audit related? They're very close. Forensic audit is more into fraud investigation, so that really targets fraud. Internal audit is more risk-based, so it is only going to target risk. Now that risk could actually not lead to a fraud. That could or could not. But internal audit is going to target anything that is risk-based. So that makes it more wide. Rama Subramaniam, data analytics is the key to internal audit, how to up your skills. So actually, you have to be on the, if you ask me, I do believe that technology is not the future, it is the present. So you have to be well-versed in technology. You have to make sure that you are well-versed in Excel, advanced Excel, Access. There are a lot of data analytic tools that you have today. So you have, if you're working on SAP, you have every angle. If you're working on Excel, you have Alteryx. There are a lot of tools. You have to figure out what your employer is doing, and that way you can figure out what you want to do. If you're not employed yet, then definitely try to make sure that you're good in Access and Excel. Pragya Singh is asking, are we going to get exposure of SOX law during our articleship period? Well, Pragya, not in India, they won't really call it SOX. So you may not hear the term, but the internal audit that you're doing in India in articleship is actually SOX, because SOX is the only internal auditing standard that the world ever came up with, and most countries adapted it from there. Ankita is asking, hi Nidhi, when I was interviewing for internal audit last year, people here at least have an opinion that statutory audit is superlative. Why has this notion developed? I'm really surprised. I have no idea, because honestly, I'll tell you, internal audit, at least in the West, it is I wouldn't say it's not superlative, it is definitely more important for any organization. And to be an internal audit, you need to have a minimum of a few years in external audit to be able to come into internal audit, because you have to have had the exposure to audit before. So it is not like anyone is superlative here, but yes, for a management, internal audit is just more important. Amit Pratap Singh, currently I'm working in internal audit profile in limited company. What other courses can I do for updating in internal audit? You can do CIA, which is Certified Internal Auditor. You can do CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner. And I think those are two amazing courses. Shweta Jhalani, is it possible to get a job in internal audit if exposure towards this domain was not extremely great during articleship? I have a job in internal audit, so yes, you can. Manikanta, I started my career as an internal auditor. Is it good opportunity in future? Oh, of course, Manikanta, because internal audit as such cannot go anywhere. And internal audit, definitely not, because as the world becomes more and more global, we're not limited to any boundaries. Everything is on internet. The management, the top management, the board will need people to make sure that things are running efficiently and they're running the way they're supposed to. Siddhant Sharma, ma'am, I am recently qualified CA. I do not have relevant experience in internal audit profile, but the vacancies always ask for 4 or 5 years of experience. So how to start as a fresher? So Siddharth, I've already said that in general, internal audit does need audit exposure. So you have to have done some external audit. If you want to get into, you can always start with risk advisory. In a lot of CA firms, they have that, and that is internal audit. So wherever you see RAS, that is internal audit. But in general, if you want to do internal audit for a company, like for example, the way I work, where I'm employed by my employer to do internal audit for my employer's locations, you do need some audit experience. Siva Subramaniam, I've already answered the data analytics question. Momita Reha, what was your journey? Are you internal audit from the very first? No, Momita, I actually did internal audit in my articleship for 3.5 years. And then I moved to external audit for 6 months. I also moved to financial reporting and analysis for 18 months. Then I moved to the US, came back to external audit, did that for 18 months again, and then finally moved to internal audit. So like I said, internal audit does require a minimum experience of external audit. Rama Subramaniam, is IA flexible? I'm in manufacturing domain. Can I get into service sector? Absolutely is, especially if you're moving from manufacturing to services, because there is the inventory component is not there. Anjali Jindal, so many people have told me that internal audit is monotonous. Can you guide me if I want to start my articleship in internal audit, as it is suggested that you will not get exposure as compared to other fields? So that is what I always say, that it is more about what kind of work you're doing. Internal audit is not monotonous. Like I said, if you're doing just one thing every day, yes, it is. If you're doing SOX the whole year, yes, it is. But like I said, if you're doing a good amount of SOX, you're doing a good amount of process improvement, you're doing a good amount of compliance regulations improvements. So then it is not monotonous. Okay, I'm trying to look at questions. Shiva Subramani, if I want to excel in internal audit field, which will be better, working in a company or a CA firm? You can work anywhere. I don't think excelling requires working in a CA firm or a company. As long as you love what you do and you see growth in what you're doing, you'll excel. Ashish Tiwari, I've started my CA articleship as a forensic audit. Will it be helpful for me to get into IA? Yes, it will, for sure. Nikita is asking, do you recommend any other courses for upcoming young professionals? I do feel like I've already mentioned that there is no particular degree that you need. What you really need is to be able to convey your knowledge out. And when we come from, I'm from India, we're not, an English-speaking country. It is not our first language, to be honest. And when I first moved to North America, just being able to put my thoughts right in English was very difficult for me. So I definitely, what I would recommend is, doing a course that kind of gives you the confidence to be able to put your thoughts into words. And I say this with experience. I'm an Indian CA. I moved to the US in 2016. I got a job as an Indian CA. I worked for 3 years as an Indian CA. I did not need anything else. In May 2019, I got my CPA. And in June 2019, I moved out of the US. So like really the CPA did not really help or anything. I did it for my own personal interest because I'd worked so much and I really wanted to do it. So the only course that I recommend is doing something related to, if you're confident enough to go and speak out, yes, absolutely, you're perfect. You don't have to do anything else. If you're not, then you really need to work on just making sure that your thoughts come out the right way because you have the knowledge. So, okay. What skills a semi-qualified CA should develop to get job in internal audit? That's a very good question. I don't, first of all, I don't agree with the term called semi-qualified CA. I do feel that, that I feel that the hard work is the same. Just because I have a license and somebody does not, that doesn't, make any difference. So please, first of all, do not feel that you're lesser than a CA in any way. And what skills do you need to develop? You probably need to read up a little bit more on SOX. You probably need to constantly think about risk assertions and all of that. And just have a very thinking mind, a very questioning mind. In general, I think that is what audit is about. And learning about businesses. If you're interested in manufacturing, you should ideally know a little bit about how manufacturing runs, about how factories run, about what ratios to look at when it comes to inventory, what ratios to look at when it comes to customers. So just knowing a little bit about your interest, industry of your interest. Tushar Bairagi, can we get an opportunity to work in finance department of a company after we work in internal audit for some years? Does that experience count for shifting to finance? Of course, why not? Because like I said, I've already mentioned, it is the leadership track. It is very fluid. You can actually, I've personally seen people move to IT after doing internal audit. I've seen people move to HR. I've seen people move to tax, finance, so many different fields. Because, in internal audit, you're the one who's going to know the business the best. Can you please elaborate more on scope of internal audit in Japanese companies? I think the scope is the same, Anjali. That doesn't change according to the location. Scope as internal audit after qualifying CPA in India, Momita is asking. Well, like I said, the scope is always there. There are a lot of jobs for internal audit risk advisory. And a lot of companies have actually outsourced their internal audit functions. So there are a lot of opportunities. You just have to make sure that you're smart enough to find them. Pragya, when our Parth, do you prepare internal audit report in MS Word only or any other software which is being used? I actually prepare mostly in MS Word, but it's because really it's not about what software you're using. What is more important is what is on the report. So it doesn't really matter what Excel, Word, whatever. What is important is, of course, you're writing what is actually meant. So you need good grammar and, you're making sense. People are moving from auditing samples to 100% assurances. How do you see? That's a question from FB Live. Of course, 100% assurance. How do I feel about it? I don't think, of course, people are doing it. And there are a lot of people who do not get comfort because audit is all about comfort, right? You have to make sure that you're comfortable with whatever you've looked at. Sometimes that comfort comes from looking at a certain number of samples. Sometimes that comes from maybe testing 10%, 50%, or sometimes that comes from 100%. It really depends from location to location. If I'm in a more risky location, yes, I would want to test more because my comfort is going to take a much more time. If I'm in a less risky location, do I have to test 100%? No. So the way I look at it is, it really depends from location to location. Sunil is asking which SAP module is helpful for IA. I don't think there's any specific SAP module that is helpful for IA because you don't really need to know a lot of details. You don't really need to know how purchase orders are created or how payments are recorded. You don't need to know all of that. You need to know the basics so that you can go and look into any process. And for that matter, SAP, we need to be if you're using SAP in your organization, as an internal auditor, you kind of need to know it all. As opposed to people who are doing just fixed assets and they're only looking at the fixed asset module. You have to know it all. You have to know the purchasing, the receiving, the fixed assets, the intangible assets. So, okay, next question. Is it necessary to have knowledge of internal audit standards to get a job? Again, not really, because did I study a lot of internal audit standards before I got a job? No. Why? Because audit is all about how you question things and how you get comfort from the answers you derive from that. So is it necessary to have a knowledge of just the internal audit standards? No. Yes, what is important is that you have exposure to audit. What is important is that you have a questioning mind. You do not take, it is, of course, internal audit is deeper than external audit. So you have to make sure that you're always questioning things way more. And that does not need any auditing standards. What it really needs is just you thinking. Amit Pratap Singh, is the periodicity of internal audit decided by the board of the company? Well, periodicity is sort of set. For most companies, it is quarterly, if you ask me. So yes, it is decided by the board because the board has to come up with, not the board, I would say the audit committee more than that, because the audit committee has to come up with when can they meet and stuff, right? Momita, does working in insurance team or tax team of Big Four US office make me eligible to shift in IA? Oh, for sure. I mean, as long as you're working in assurance, I don't think tax counts because tax is very different than what we do. Like I said, you need exposure in audit. So yeah, so definitely any, and for that matter, not Big Four, just working anywhere in audit will count. Is there any chance that November intermediate exam will postpone to December in terms of the current situation? This is from FB Live. Well, it's just the times that we live in, they are so uncertain that we have to take each day as it comes. I don't think I can decide on or have an opinion on what's going to happen in November. For now, I just hope that everybody's keeping safe and we all continue to remain safe. Pragya is asking, when do we get exposure of SOX law while doing internal audit? Well, if you're doing internal audit, you're doing SOX. Like I said, SOX is internal audit. So you're not really like doing anything but SOX. So can we get your LinkedIn ID? Yes, my name is my LinkedIn ID, but my LinkedIn is up. I have crossed the maximum limit. I think there's a limit of 30,000. I crossed that. So if you definitely, you can send me questions on LinkedIn, but make sure you follow me instead of sending a connection request, because that's not going to get you anywhere. And send me a message if you want to, or you could send me a message on Insta, YouTube, wherever. Parth Shah, can you show a sample IA report to know which are the points in which reporting is done? Like I said, Parth, I've already said this, I'm legally obligated to not share anything about my work. It's just, that is my employment contract. So, and once you start working in internal audit, you're going to realize that how there are a lot of NDAs involved, which are non-disclosure agreements, where we basically, in a lot of audits, we sign NDAs, and these are things that, we will not be sharing with anyone. So we don't even share it with our families. What I can tell you is that what are the points in which reporting is done totally depends on what kind of audit you're performing. If you're performing a SOX audit, your reporting can only be on SOX, right? So it has to be on the cycles of SOX. It can be on cash, it will be on payables and receivables, inventory, fixed assets. So those are the reportings that you're not going to report on compliance. You're not going to report on a corporate law if you're doing SOX audit. Okay, so basically at articleship level, we are not into SOX law. Well, Pragya, I've already said, if you're doing internal audit, you're probably doing SOX. There is no other version of internal audit. Internal audit is SOX. That is how it first started, right? So a lot of companies adapted it from there. And yep, I think that's about it. Do we have any other questions? No. Okay. Hey, CA Club. Okay, perfect. Thank you. This was great. I wish you guys all the success. If you have anything related to internal audit that you want to ask, or relating to global opportunities in internal audit, make sure that you send those questions over to me. I'm more than happy to answer. I wish you guys all the best. If you're doing CE or any other course, wishing you guys the best. Please give us your YouTube channel link. My name, Nidhi Nagori, just go and Google it. You'll find me on YouTube, Insta, LinkedIn, anything. So I really hope that this session was beneficial. Stay safe for now, and make sure that you think about this profession a little bit more. Do not get scared by what you hear from people, because only if you do it, you're going to know if it is worth your interests or not. It is a very exciting field. I've never really regretted or felt like I want to move out. I definitely see myself doing this for life. So wishing you guys all the very best with everything that you're doing. Remember that, there is no particular degree that can take you anywhere. Whatever you're learning right now, through platforms like CA Club, that is more than enough. So thanks, guys. Stay safe and take care.